They said he would die on those streets, that he was too far gone, too broken, too lost. But what the world throws away, God still calls by name. This is the story of a man who didn't find God in a church pew, but under a bridge, surrounded by rats, rain, and silence. And if you think God has forgotten you, keep listening. The rain always fell hardest under the bridge. Daniel pulled the thin, torn blanket tighter around his shoulders. His fingers were purple from the cold, his beard matted with dust and ash. The city above buzzed with life, cars, laughter, music, but none of it reached down here. Down here, everything was grey. He wasn't supposed to end up like this. Years ago, Daniel Price had been a name on flyers across Chicago's South Side, a talented blues guitarist who could make a crowd cry with 2 chords. He used to dream about big stages, bright lights, and making his mother proud. But dreams are fragile things when pain learns your name. It started small, a few drinks after gigs, then something stronger, just to stay awake, he'd say. By the time he realized he needed help, help didn't want him anymore. The bars stopped calling, the friends stopped answering, and the music stopped meaning anything. Now he sat under a bridge, his guitar gone, his faith gone, and his will to fight barely flickering. A passing car splashed filthy water on his legs. Daniel didn't even flinch. He reached for a half-empty bottle tucked beside him, his only friend that never asked questions. He raised it toward the dark sky, muttering, "Here's to another night in paradise." Before taking a long drink, the liquid burned down his throat like fire. Somewhere behind him, a rat scurried across a wet newspaper. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Even they've got families," he said aloud, his voice hoarse and cracked. From above, he could hear faint church bells echoing through the city. Sunday night, he remembered what that used to feel like, his mother dragging him to service, the smell of her perfume, her voice whispering, "Danny, God's got plans for you." "Plans," he scoffed. "Yeah, right." He leaned back against the wall, eyes heavy. The drizzle turned into a storm. Water dripped through the cracks of the bridge, hitting his face in cold rhythm. The world was quiet, except for the thunder in his chest. A small bar in Chicago, smoke, laughter, neon lights. Daniel stood on stage, his guitar glowing under dim light. His voice, rough and soulful, filled the room. A man in a leather jacket clapped loudly from the corner. "You've got something, kid," he said after the set. "Ever thought of going bigger?" Daniel smiled. "Bigger sounds nice." That man would later introduce him to the pills. "Helps you focus," he'd said. "Helps you forget." He was right about the second part. The sound of footsteps woke him. Daniel squinted through the fog. A figure approached, holding a small paper bag and an umbrella. "Evening," the man said softly. He was older, mid-50s, wearing a worn brown coat and glasses. Daniel frowned. "You lost or something?" "No," the man smiled gently. "I just wanted to make sure you ate today." He set the bag beside Daniel, a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a folded napkin. Daniel stared at it suspiciously. "You one of those church people?" the man chuckled. "Something like that. My name's Samuel. I run a small ministry a few blocks away." Daniel snorted. "Ministry, huh? You saving souls or scouting lost causes?" "Both," Samuel said simply. Daniel looked away. "Well, sorry, preacher man. I stopped believing a long time ago." Samuel nodded, unbothered. "That's okay. God hasn't stopped believing in you." For a moment, Daniel froze. Those words felt like lightning striking something long buried. "Yeah, well," he muttered, "he's wasting his time." Samuel smiled, adjusted his umbrella, and began to walk away. "Maybe," he said over his shoulder, "or maybe he's just getting started." Daniel watched him disappear into the rain. He sat in silence for a while, staring at the sandwich. Then he picked it up and took a bite. It was the first real meal he'd had in 3 days. When he finished, he noticed something inside the napkin, A small, folded card. He opened it. Handwritten words read, "You may have lost everything, but God hasn't lost you." Pastor Samuel, Isaiah 43:1. "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in years, tears mixed with the rain. That night, he didn't ask for a miracle. He just whispered, "If you're still out there, don't forget me." And somewhere in the storm, heaven heard him. The next morning, the rain was gone, but the streets still smelled of it. Daniel woke up shivering, the blankets soaked through. A soft light filtered through the cracks of the bridge. The city was waking, horns, footsteps, coffee smells from above. He reached for the paper bag beside him, empty. Only the note remained. He ran his fingers over the words again. "You are mine." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Something inside him refused to throw it away. Later that evening, while Daniel sat by a trash barrel fire, a familiar voice broke through the crackle of flames. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel turned, half annoyed, half curious. "You again?" Samuel smiled. "I told you I don't give up easy." He sat down, warming his hands over the fire. He handed Daniel another small bag. Daniel sighed. "What is it this time, preacher? Salvation in a sandwich?" Samuel chuckled. "Just turkey and cheese. The salvation part's optional." Daniel smirked despite himself. "You church folks are persistent." Samuel looked at him, not with pity but with patience. "It's not about being church folks. It's about remembering that people matter." That line hit Daniel harder than he wanted to admit. For a moment neither spoke. The fire popped. A rat scurried by. Samuel glanced around and said quietly, "You don't belong here, Daniel." Daniel's head snapped up. "How do you know my name?" Samuel smiled. "You told me. Last night when you were half asleep, you said, 'Don't forget me, Daniel.'" Daniel froze. He didn't remember saying that out loud. Samuel continued softly, "God didn't." Something twisted in Daniel's chest. Anger, disbelief, maybe hope. "Don't start with that. God left me a long time ago." Samuel nodded calmly. "You might have walked away." But he never did. Daniel shook his head and laughed bitterly. "Man, you don't know what I've done." "I don't need to," Samuel said, looking into the fire. "Grace isn't earned. It's given." That night, Daniel tried to sleep, but the words haunted him. Grace isn't earned. It's given. He tossed and turned. The sound of the city felt louder than usual. Sirens, rain, and somewhere in the distance, gospel music from a passing car. He pressed his palms against his ears. "Shut up," he muttered, as if trying to silence his own thoughts. Then came the shaking, the cold sweat, the pain crawling through his veins. He was withdrawing. The alcohol and pills had stopped working. His body trembled violently. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He hit the concrete hard. His vision blurred. The world tilted. "God, if you're real, I can't do this anymore." He blacked out. When he woke up, he wasn't under the bridge. He was lying on a small cot, covered with a clean blanket, sunlight streaming through a window. He blinked. The air smelled like soap and coffee. Samuel's voice came from nearby. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty." Daniel squinted. "Where am I?" "My church's recovery center," Samuel said, placing a glass of water beside him. "You scared the life out of me last night. Found you unconscious under the bridge. Thought I'd lost you." Daniel stared at him, bewildered. "Why would you bother? I'm not worth saving." Samuel smiled faintly. "Neither am I. That's the point." Daniel looked away, his throat tightening. "You don't even know me. I don't need to. I just need to love you the way God asked me to." Tears stung Daniel's eyes. He turned his face toward the wall. Samuel continued gently, "You can stay as long as you want. No rules, no pressure, just rest." Days passed. Daniel slept, ate, and mostly stared at the ceiling. Samuel checked in daily, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit in silence. One afternoon he brought a small guitar. "Found this at a thrift store," he said. "Figured you might remember how to make it sing." Daniel frowned. "You've been talking to ghosts?" Samuel grinned. "No, just the Holy Spirit." Daniel laughed, a real laugh this time. He took the guitar reluctantly, strummed once. The sound was rough but familiar. Something broke open inside him. That night, when the lights went out, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed playing softly. He didn't remember the chords, but his fingers seemed to. He closed his eyes and whispered, "God, I don't know if you're listening, but if you are, thank you for sending that crazy preacher." The walls of the recovery center were plain, the kind that echoed every sound. Daniel stared at them every day, counting the cracks like a prisoner marking time. It wasn't the food or the silence that bothered him. It was the mirror. For the first time in years, he had to look at himself sober, and sobriety was a cruel truth-teller. His face looked older than he remembered, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling. He'd lost everything, his music, his friends, even his name. But inside all that wreckage, something new was stirring. It was faint, like an ember that refused to die. Every morning, Samuel would knock gently and bring him coffee. "Still breathing?" he'd say with a grin. Daniel always rolled his eyes, but there was a warmth to it, the kind that had nothing to do with caffeine. Sometimes they'd sit outside on the small patio, sunlight bouncing off wet concrete. Samuel always had his Bible open, worn and marked with notes. "Why do you keep reading that thing?" Daniel asked one morning. Samuel smiled. "Because every time I do, I remember who I am and who I'm not." Daniel sipped his coffee, thinking. "And who are you not?" "God," Samuel said simply, "and that's the best news I know." Daniel laughed softly. He didn't fully understand, but it stayed with him. In the evenings, Daniel would pick up the guitar Samuel gave him. At first it was just noise, clumsy, disconnected, but music has a way of remembering when we forget. Each night his fingers found something truer. He began to play softly in the chapel after everyone went to bed. One night, Samuel found him there, eyes closed, whispering words between chords. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." His voice broke on the last word. Samuel didn't interrupt. He just stood at the door and whispered, "Keep playing, son. You're praying louder than you think." One afternoon, a counselor named Rachel came into the chapel while Daniel was playing. She listened for a moment, then asked, "Do you believe that song?" Daniel looked up, confused. "What do you mean? Do you believe grace is amazing, or just a nice idea?" He hesitated. "I want to." Rachel smiled. "Then keep walking toward it, even if you're crawling." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Memories came like floodwaters. Faces, mistakes, the overdose that almost killed his best friend. He curled up on the floor, shaking. "God, why me?" he whispered. "Why are you even bothering?" The silence answered first. Then something deeper. Not a voice, exactly. More like a presence pressing against his heart. "Because I never stopped calling you mine." Tears fell freely. He felt heat in his chest, spreading like a fire that didn't burn. It was cleansing him, consuming his guilt, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks. Daniel began helping in small ways, cleaning the kitchen, fixing the center's old speakers, talking to new residents. He wasn't preaching, he was just living proof. People listened to him because he didn't talk like a saint. He talked like someone who'd crawled through hell and survived. One evening, Samuel asked him to share his story at the Friday service. Daniel panicked. "Me? No way. I'm not that guy." Samuel smiled. "You're exactly that guy." Friday night came. The small chapel was full, 30 people, all fighting their own battles. Daniel stood at the front, hands shaking. He looked at the cross hanging above the stage. Hi, he began awkwardly. My name's Daniel, and I've been lost for a long time. He paused, swallowing hard. I used to think I was too dirty for God, too broken to fix, but turns out he's not afraid of dirt. A few people nodded through tears. He continued, I kept running from him, but he kept finding me, even under a bridge, even when I didn't want to be found. His voice cracked. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but he hasn't forgotten you either. The room fell silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap, not because it was a performance, but because they saw themselves in him. Samuel stood in the back, smiling quietly. From that night on, everything changed. Daniel wasn't healed overnight. Recovery rarely works that way. But his heart had turned toward the light, and that made all the difference. He started reading the Bible every morning. He underlined verses that felt written just for him. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. Psalm 113:7. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Those words weren't poetry to him anymore, they were oxygen. 6 months later, Daniel left the recovery center, not because he was perfect, but because he was ready. Samuel hugged him at the door. You know this isn't goodbye, right? Daniel smiled. I know, it's see you Sunday. Samuel laughed. You're learning. Daniel walked out into the sunlight. The same streets that once owned him now looked different, brighter somehow. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking toward something real. 6 months after leaving the recovery center, Daniel's life looked like something out of another man's dream. He had a small apartment, a steady job repairing sound equipment, and a new rhythm. Work, church, sleep, repeat. He was still learning how to live without the noise of addiction. He'd wake up early every morning, sit by the window with coffee, and read his Bible. Some mornings, he didn't understand a word, but he kept reading, because for the first time in years, it felt like someone was talking back. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Be still. That was the hard part. One afternoon, Daniel was fixing speakers at a downtown event space. The client was a young entrepreneur named Marcus. Flashy suit, gold watch, quick smile. Man, you're good at this, Marcus said, watching him work. Daniel shrugged. Been doing this a long time. Marcus leaned in. Ever thought of starting your own business? I've got connections, people who pay top dollar for sound setups. You help me out, I help you out, we can make serious money. Daniel hesitated. I don't know. I'm still getting back on my feet. Marcus smiled. Hey, everybody's got to start somewhere. No one has to know how you got the gear. That sentence hit him like a bullet. He remembered those words. No one has to know. That's how every bad chapter in his life had started. He looked at Marcus and said softly, Thanks, but I've already sold that soul once. Not doing it again. Marcus laughed. You're one of those God guys now, huh? Daniel smiled calmly. No, just a man who finally met him. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Marcus's words echoed in his head. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the moments that had almost destroyed him. The lies, the easy deals, the shortcuts that always ended in regret. He sat up, gripping his Bible like it was oxygen. Lord, he whispered, I don't ever want to go back there. If I start to fall again, pull me back. The next morning, as if on cue, he got a call. It was Pastor Samuel. Daniel, how's life treating you? Daniel chuckled. Better than I deserve. Samuel said, I've got a job for you. Our sound system at the church keeps cutting out. Think you could fix it? Daniel smiled. You don't even have to ask. Working in that old church felt like coming home. The sound booth smelled of wood polish and prayer. While he worked, the choir rehearsed a song that made him stop mid-cable. Waymaker, miracle worker, Promise keeper. He closed his eyes. Tears filled them before he could stop them. Rachel, the counselor who once told him to crawl toward Grace, walked in. "Still fixing things?" she asked playfully. Daniel smiled. "Trying to, one wire at a time." She grinned. "That's how God does it too, one heart at a time." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Rachel said, "You ever think about using your story to help others?" Daniel looked surprised. "Me? I'm no preacher." She shook her head. "No, you're better. You're proof." Weeks later, the church invited Daniel to share his story at a youth event. He almost said no, but Samuel insisted. "You're not telling a story," Samuel said. "You're testifying." The night of the event, Daniel stood backstage, palms sweating. He could hear the crowd, mostly teenagers, laughing and scrolling on their phones. He whispered, "God, if this is you, speak through me, because I don't have the words." He walked up to the mic. The room fell silent. "Good evening," he said nervously. "My name's Daniel, and I shouldn't be standing here. By all logic, I should be dead, forgotten, or in a jail cell. But grace, real grace, doesn't follow logic." A few heads lifted. He continued, "If you think you've messed up too much for God to use you, congratulations, you're exactly who he's looking for." The crowd was silent, hanging on his words. He told them about the bridge, the bottle, and the preacher who refused to walk past him. And when he said, "God never stopped calling my name," something in the room shifted. By the time he finished, dozens of kids were crying and praying. Samuel stood at the back, smiling through tears. Months passed. Daniel's reputation spread. He started getting calls, schools, churches, recovery groups, asking him to share his story. He never charged a cent. People began donating money to his old church, calling it the Bridge Fund. The name stuck. Within a year, the Bridge Foundation was born, a non-profit helping homeless men find faith, work, and family again. Daniel often said, "We don't rescue people. We remind them they're not forgotten." The foundation grew fast. Companies partnered. A year later, Daniel stood on a stage in front of hundreds, introducing new shelters across Chicago. He looked up at the lights and whispered, "From a bridge to a building, only God could write that." But blessings don't erase battles. One night, Daniel got a call from a friend from the old days, Lenny. "Hey man, heard you're doing good, got a deal for you. One quick job, big cash, just like old times." Daniel's heart sank. The voice of temptation hadn't changed. He paused before replying, "I'm not that man anymore." Lenny laughed. "Come on, Danny. God won't mind one little hustle." Daniel took a deep breath. "No, Lenny, he'll mind, and so will I." He hung up and fell to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, trembling, "thank you for taking me out of that darkness. I'll never go back." He sat there in silence. The same kind of silence he once feared, now filled with peace. A few days later, Daniel visited Samuel at the church. The old pastor smiled when he saw him. "You look different." Daniel chuckled. "It's called peace. Apparently it's contagious." Samuel laughed. "You've come a long way, son." Daniel nodded. "I'm still coming. God's not done yet." They stood side by side in the empty church, looking at the cross. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Samuel whispered, "He never is, Daniel. He never is." It had been 5 years since Daniel last slept under a bridge. Now, he stood under bright lights, not from passing cars or city lamps, but from cameras and television crews. Behind him, a banner read, "The Bridge Foundation, restoring hope, one life at a time." Hundreds filled the auditorium. Former addicts, families, pastors, business leaders all gathered to celebrate the opening of 3 new shelters across Chicago. Daniel adjusted his suit nervously. He never got used to this part. The crowd cheered as the host announced, "Please welcome our founder, Daniel Price." He took a deep breath, walked up to the microphone and looked out over the crowd. "5 years ago," he began, his voice trembling, "I was under a bridge, drunk, broken, and ready to die. I didn't believe in God. I didn't even believe in myself, but that didn't stop him from believing in me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I thought I was trash, he continued, but God doesn't throw away what he can still use. He picked me up off the pavement, cleaned me up and said, "Now you're going to help others find home too." Applause filled the room, but Daniel lifted his hand gently. "Please don't clap for me. Clap for the one who never stopped looking for me." The audience rose to their feet, clapping and crying. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Daniel smiled through tears. If God can take a man like me, a liar, an addict, a nobody, and make him a vessel for hope, then there's nothing he can't do for you. The story spread faster than he expected. Local news aired the event that night under the headline, "From the Streets to Salvation, the man changing Chicago one soul at a time." Then came the interviews, Christian podcasts, national TV, even a major news network. But Daniel refused to turn his story into fame. He told every host the same thing. "This isn't about me. It's about the God who still walks under bridges." His words resonated. Videos of his speeches went viral. One clip of him praying with a former addict under the same bridge he once lived hit 1 million views in days. The caption read, "Where it started and where grace returned." One chilly Sunday morning, Daniel returned to that old bridge alone. The city was quieter now, the concrete worn by years of rain. He stood exactly where his life had nearly ended. For a moment, he saw his past self sitting there, shaking, hopeless, defeated. He whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me there." He knelt down and prayed, not the desperate prayer of a broken man, but the grateful prayer of a redeemed one. A soft voice interrupted. "Still talking to the Lord under bridges, huh?" He looked up. It was Pastor Samuel, smiling with that same old umbrella in hand. Daniel laughed through tears. "Guess some habits are worth keeping." Samuel chuckled. "You've done well, son." Daniel stood, emotion heavy in his chest. "I just tried to do what you did for me." Samuel's eyes glistened. "No, Daniel, you did what he did for you." They stood in silence, side by side, under the bridge that once symbolized death, now reborn as a monument of grace. Months later, the Bridge Foundation expanded beyond Chicago. Volunteers opened shelters in Detroit, Dallas, and Atlanta. Daniel spent his time traveling, speaking, and mentoring those the world forgot. He never preached with arrogance. He told stories about hunger, about rain, about the sound of rats, and the smell of redemption. One night after a conference in Texas, a young man approached him. "Sir," he said, tears in his eyes, "I was going to end my life tonight. Then I watched your video. If God can do that for you, maybe he can do it for me." Daniel hugged him tightly. "Son, don't you ever forget. He specializes in lost causes." Years later, on the 10th anniversary of the Bridge Foundation, Daniel stood on stage once more. But this time, there were no cameras, just hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the ministry. He opened his worn Bible to Isaiah 61:3 and read aloud, "He gives beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, and praise for despair." Then he closed it and said, "I am living proof that ashes can bloom." The room erupted in applause, but Daniel wasn't looking at the crowd, and he was looking upward. "I was dead," he whispered, "and now I'm alive. Not rich, not perfect, just found." A few days later, he walked alone through downtown Chicago. People nodded as he passed. Some recognized him, most didn't. He didn't mind. He reached a small park and sat on a bench, watching kids play. He smiled. He wasn't haunted by the past anymore. He was humbled by it. A gust of wind rustled the trees. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun. "You may have lost everything, but I haven't lost you." He smiled softly, whispering, "Yeah, Lord." I remember. The camera of life panned upward, from a man once forgotten to a city forever changed, and higher still, to the light that started it all.